Like Susan just said.
Double
Like
check.
Susan just said, my name is Noah Walker. I'm a voting engagement specialist. I've been here since 2018. So we're going to be talking about informed voting. In the Supreme Court case under Sanders v. Westerbury, it says, no right is more precious in a free country than that of having a voice in the election of those who make the laws under which as good citizens we must live. That was in 1964. So what we want you to do is to vote your conscience, and what that really means is that we want you to have a voice and have a right to have a voice, and then make informed decisions, and then vote for who and what you want. And once that happens, then that's the beginning point, however, of really building power and really starting any kind of advocacy. It's really more of a starting point more than anything if you are granted your right to vote. Oops. Hold on, I'm going back. So really what the informed vote really means is you really want to make sure that whoever you're voting for or not, you really want to research the political candidate's policy agenda. And that means looking at their platforms about how they want to see, you know, their state or their country or their locality being ran. And then once that happens and once they're elected into office, you can visit their website or any of their news feeds. You can just click their name, look at the news feed, and then see what they've been doing so far while they've been in office. And then you can fact check any kind of websites that are nonpartisan. PolitiFact and Snopes are good sources. They tell you whether something of some kind of statement from like a politician or a political candidate is true, mostly true, somewhat true, mostly false, or just flat out wrong. And then for kind of like figure out like which bills they have supported or not supported, you can look into GovTrack and Ballotpedia for that. Another website that'd be really good is the Bridge magazine, and they have their own research team about investigating any kind of facts and whether that holds a lot of ground for truth or not. So you can get a sample ballot at the Michigan Voter Information Center website. And basically what you do is enter your first and last name. You basically go for your date of birth and then your zip code. And then once you click on that, then given that you're registered, it basically says view my sample ballot. And then it has like a whole list of candidates along with any kind of ballot proposals. Now, if you haven't really researched on candidates and you're having a troubling time, especially with ballot proposals, then feel free to ask any kind of questions. That way you become a lot more prepared and armed with knowledge in terms of getting access to vote. And try to research locally or nationally or statewide that impacts people with disabilities in terms of their agendas. That's one way to really look at being able to really advocate for ourselves and not let others determine our lives. So to be able to register to vote, you must be at least like a Michigan resident. you must be at least 18 years of age or older. You must be a US citizen. If you're currently convicted and sentenced with a felony, you're not allowed to vote. But if you're no longer having a felony, then you're able to vote. And that's Michigan state law. So if someone tries to spread information saying that, oh, you had a felony, therefore you can't vote at all, that's simply not true. It's only when you're no longer incarcerated. And hopefully nobody is planning to get incarcerated. That would not be good. So you fill out an application by using a driver's license or a state identification card. That's the most common way that people do it. But you can also go for a bank or utility statement or any kind of other government documents, such as like any kind of paycheck from where you're employed. And then the clerk will send you a voter ID card. You do not need to bring your voter ID card if you're voting in person. I knew that from experience when I came in and gave my coworker a voter ID card, but it says that we're only just looking for your driver's license or state ID at this point. And then you'll receive access to a sample ballot, how to contact your clerk, and then which polling place, like which area your polling place is really located and where you need to go to. That's both in the Michigan Voter Information Center along with the League of Women Voters, and that's before you're voting. Now, this is the big discussion for right now. So every single voter in Michigan right now is eligible for absentee voting. And especially given now during COVID-19, more people are really applying for absentee voting.
Oh, yeah,
they are in regular print, excuse me, regular print, large print, and in Spanish. Blind and low vision voters do have a large print option, but they also have an option for electronic ballot access. This is during a lawsuit that happened before May 5th from the Nightman law firm. And it stated that people with visually impaired, with visual impairments and people who are blind, they do not have enough access to vote by mail because it's usually in print. So that is really your right to really start advocating for electronic ballot access. And that's the same kind of electronic ballot access that overseas voters and people who are in the military use when they're not in the country and they're deployed. So you can register the same day when you're voting at the clerk's office. The deadline for an absentee ballot during the general election is October 20th of 2020. For really registering right now during the primary, if you haven't really registered yet or voted yet, then I would recommend doing so at the clerk's office. That way your vote is really more going to count. Because as of recently, there has been some backlog with absentee voting, given how popular it is, and also given how long the delays have been.
No, we had a question about
Yes.
people voting from home. What if,
Sure.
So a blind and low vision user can use a computer to vote? But what if the question is, what if they don't have a touch screen? Is this going to be, what kind of electronic ballot is this going to be?
The electronic ballot is, that's a really, really good question. I don't have the full answer to that, but There is kind of like an option that's listed on the Michigan Voter Information Center under the consent decree. And then there's also kind of like, there's probably also should be a link to kind of like what type of device that would be. So, but if that in case doesn't really work, then I would advocate for a touch screen.
I'm wondering, would the same thing apply to Illinois residents?
What do you mean?
Would the technology site for the voting, would that apply to Illinois residents, or is it just in Michigan?
I'm talking about like voting rights specifically in Michigan. In Illinois, I would check your state's website for what's really needed. So,
Okay.
because I don't know what's going on in Illinois.
I'll definitely come on for other stuff, but I don't want to get confused because I live in Illinois and this might confuse me more. So, I want to offer that I appreciate giving time for the space, but I personally, since I don't live in Michigan, I don't want to get confused. So,
Yeah.
but I'll be on soon again another day, but I don't want to get confused. So
Okay, that's fine. That's totally your choice. And really, I would, if you're curious about your own state, then I would really contact Equip for Equality in Illinois. That's the protection and advocacy in your state. So that's what I would recommend.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll put my email address for those of you that were interested in my classes, but I'll let you continue. But thanks for the space.
Oh, no problem.
All right.
And most of the workshops are not Michigan specific, but this is one that's, because voting has a lot of state issues. It is.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Are there any other questions before I move on?
Well, Laura, you had one.
Oops. You mentioned Bridge Magazine. I tried going on to Bridge Magazine one time and it looked like I had to subscribe. Is that the case?
Not really, because I mean, if you want to subscribe, you can do so. And then there's also kind of like a lot of the really great thing about it is that it has like a bunch of special report topics related to the entire state of Michigan, and they're kind of like Michigan specific issues. And another thing is that they do have like fact-checking website as well. So it's a nonpartisan website. So they kind of go for kind of like issues that affect people who live in the state.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So this is my cell phone number. Feel free to give me a call at 18 calling from the Pickers Over Group at Maryland.
All right, nobody objects, so I'm going to continue. So we're going to be talking about voting in person. What that means is bringing some kind of like form of identification. It doesn't have to be always like a driver's license or a state ID within the state of Michigan, although that is very recommended. But there are other documents with a photo that you can bring to your polling place. If you don't have a photo identification that is accepted by poll workers, then you do have the right to sign an affidavit. You say your name, your address, and then sign the list of voters. And then a poll worker will give you either a paper ballot, or they can direct you to the voter machine that you use. And from there, you fill out the ballot, put it in a privacy folder, and take it to a tabulating machine. And then feed the ballot into the tabulating machine. And then hopefully by then, it should accept your ballot, and then you've basically voted and get an I voted sticker. That's the way that it works within voting in person. And there's a lot of things that need to happen in order for voting in person to work. One of the biggest ones is physical access. It doesn't just mean that it should have like wheelchair access, but it also means that the voting machine has to be accessible to people. It should also mean that the doors should be wide enough for a person with a wheelchair or with any kind of like crutches or anything out there to basically be able to fit in. It means that there needs to be parking spaces reserved for people who have disabilities. So if somebody doesn't have like a handicap sign on their car and they park in a handicap parking spot, please report that. We do not want that to happen during your time to vote. There should be alternative marketing devices, and then there should also be privacy and independence when voting. And then there should be absentee ballots in case if you're not comfortable with voting in person, meaning voting by home. And then even though you do have privacy and independence when voting, you do have the right to get help from others as long as they're not willing to influence you from voting. And the best way to do that is with both a Republican and a Democrat precinct delegate helping you with the ballot.
Does the voting site have to have accessible bathrooms?
Oops, sorry. Skipping too far ahead. So when you're talking about accessible bathrooms, I mean, that would be a good requirement in case if you need to go there, but that would be good. But really for being able to vote, there should be some seating for those with invisible disabilities. There should be like wheelchair access, and then people who are poll workers in person, they have to be very competent with people with disabilities. So there needs to be disability competency training for those who are poll workers.
I have a question. You said something about if you need help, you need to have a precinct worker from both parties. Do they normally recruit precinct workers from each of the parties so that they're present?
Yeah, they try to recruit both Democrats and Republicans. It's kind of a tricky process if it's really like from someone who like some kind of county that has like mainly like majority of it is being dominated by one party. So within swing counties, that's not really much of a problem because they have both Democrats and Republicans living there. But for example, if it's like Wayne County, for example, they would have to find a Republican who lives in Wayne County or elsewhere so they can become like a precinct delegate. Or if it's like in Missaukee County, which is like predominantly a Republican county in northern Michigan, right in the sticks, they're going to have to find a Democratic Party precinct delegate there.
Okay, there was also a question from Mark McWilliams. He's asked, does the voter access terminal print out a paper ballot?
They normally do, which is a bit of a problem for people who do have print disabilities. But you know, it's basically kind of like a print and paper ballot has been kind of like an error. during like kind of like recent times for elections. So basically, it's a little bit of like it's a little bit different than a paper ballot, but once you put it in, then it's basically accepted as an actual ballot under the tabulator when it works properly.
The accessible ballot, you had to pull off the tab, whereas the regular ballots you didn't, and that created a tremendous amount of confusion. Is that still the case?
Well, I don't know if that's truly still the case yet, because most people are doing vote by mail at this point. So if there is any kind of similar issues right now, then that would have to be addressed.
And you did say that does every state provide large print ballot applications? You think?
I believe that depends on each state, but they should be able to give them a large print as well for those who are really just like low vision. If they're blind, then they're going to have to go for kind of like screen readers. They would have to go for any type of braille option that's available to them. So that needs to be a right for people who are visually impaired.
Okay. So you can proceed. No more questions on the chat.
Okay. So this video is Imani Barbarin, who is from Disability Rights Pennsylvania, and she has also been part of the Vote for Access series at the polls. So the one great thing about this video is that it features two people from Michigan. It includes the Lansing City Clerk and somebody from Flint who finally was able to get the right to vote after 20 years of being denied. So we're going to showcase that right now.
Imagine this. It's election day. A young black woman with arm crutches walks down the street. She reaches the candidates. You know where your polling place is. Andy Bourraine's transportation. She stops and looks up at an enormous flight of stairs.
We can't see it, no.
Polling center. Nothing goes to plan. If you can't cast your vote, she shakes her crutch angrily. The truth of the matter is, you can vote for everything and still be within a
No, we can't see anything.
You can't see anything?
No,
Okay.
nothing's happening on our screen.
All right.
Maybe if I spotlight you?
Let me,
'Cause I have it set so anybody can share their screen.
I don't think that's the issue. So what it looks like is going on is there's a video that you tried to embed in the PowerPoint, but I don't
Yeah.
think it worked correctly. We looked at it earlier and it wasn't actually playing. So I think that might be what's happening. But
okay. All right. Well, that's fine. There is some information that if it were embedded correctly, then you would get valuable information. But it's kind of like pretty much the information that I gave you before, but also this slide right here, where if you do have any kind of problems, then the election protection hotline number is 1-866-687-8683, and that provides immediate services to those who have trouble voting or have been denied the right to vote. Again, that's 1-866-687-8683. They are the first line of defense if you're having any kind of trouble or your right to vote has been denied somehow. And then the next step would be if they are trying to contact us, then that will be sent to the intake and referral team, and then intake and referral team will pass to us, and then we get to contact the clerks. So we are a federally designated protection and advocacy agency serving the state of Michigan. Our mission is to advocate for the rights of people with disabilities, historically, we've been on the ground against any kind of like institutionalization. And we've also been pretty much advocating for the right of community integrated living and employment. So basically, we're trying to ban what happened during the 1920s when our rights have been basically abused horrifically. And then there is a protection and advocacy agency in all the states and territories, and then our services are free and confidential. So our main number is 1-800-228-5923. And then our Marquette contact is 1-866-928-5910. Now, the website on the right is our current website, but just a fair warning, if you try to click on it, it would not be available. So, but in about a month, we'll change our website to Disability Rights Michigan. That's going to be coming in about a month.
So question, these 866 numbers, are they just Michigan numbers or are they national?
They're national.
Okay, thank you.
I believe there were some other questions as well, if I recall.
Okay. Anybody else? Any other questions? Well, thank you, Noah. You certainly elaborated on some questions I had. So that was excellent. So you all know we're having another speaker on the top of the hour. We will be having the Secretary of State from the state of Michigan talking about accessibility of the voting machines and the process to learn how to vote. So she's going to be speaking on that. And then I also wanted to tell you about some of the other workshops this week. Tomorrow there will be one on Not Dead Yet, the folks that were behind imprisoning Dr. Kevorkian here in the 80s for letting people use his assisted suicide machine that was later found to be illegal. They were the ones behind him and Peter Singer, who believed that it was okay to euthanize babies until they reached 28 days. So they're going to be doing a presentation in the afternoon at 2. And then in the evening, there will be Deva Kasnitz, who will be doing a presentation on what is disability studies. And you might be surprised, it's not necessarily everything you think it is, or it's more than what you think it is. So I think that should be an interesting. And then Friday, we will have a workshop on supported decision-making. That's because all of us need help in making decisions sometimes. It's not always something we can do independently, and it relates directly to voting because people who you might think are not capable of voting have the right to vote, and they have the right to ask for help in understanding who they might want to vote for and why they want to vote for them and getting assistance at the polls. And then Saturday, we will have Elaine, who is on board here, doing a concert. Actually, while you're checking that out, I can do some introductions. But as Nick said to me yesterday, I need to start by telling you who I am. So I'm Susan Fitzmaurice, and I'm the header behind this. I did an event similar in 2015 and decided to do it again now. And it is a 2-month-long event starting this past Sunday. Every day at 2 o'clock, there is some sort of event. They're extremely diverse. If any kind of intersection disability has with anything, we've got a workshop for it. We've got stuff for kids, we got stuff for older folks, we got people for millennials, you name it, we've got something going. So check out the calendar at mi-ada.org and see what we have going on. Today, we're honored to have 2 people our primary presenter is our Secretary of State for the state of Michigan, Jocelyn Benson. And she has quite a background. She used to be the former dean at Wayne State University at their law school. She co-founded an organization that supported military spouses. She's on the Michigan Task Force for Women in Sports. And she's been very involved in civil rights, people with disabilities and others, not just people with disabilities, and has been, working hard to bring Michigan into the forefront of having accessible voting. And then she is going to be co-presented with Pat Cannon. And Pat has been the state director for the Michigan Council for the Blind for a lot of years. Isn't it present time? It has been. He was the president of the National Council of State Agencies for the Blind. He was the director of the Michigan Commission on Disability Concerns, and he was on the U.S. Access Board. So quite a lot of wonderful experiences these two have between them that can certainly bring us a lot of insight into what makes voting accessible or not. And hopefully they will answer questions were submitted in advance, and hopefully they will answer your questions.
May I begin then?
You may dig in.
Okay. First, Secretary Benson, thank you for being with us this afternoon. We have a few questions to ask, and I know that our time is limited, and we need to be wrapping up around 4:45, and we will make every attempt to do so. And Jocelyn, we have some questions from people with disabilities that have been acquired over the last couple of days, and I'll start with some of those questions first. And the question is, how do people with disabilities get registered to vote, and what kind of special options are available to them to make it easier for them as a person with a disability?
Well, we have, in terms of getting registered to vote, there are a number of options in our state. You can register to vote online, and you can register to vote, and actually you're automatically registered to vote if you're eligible to be registered. Anytime you interact with our office to get a driver's license or a state ID. So it's really easier than ever to be registered to vote in our state. And we're working daily to also ensure that we're protecting access to the vote for citizens with disabilities and truly every citizen in our state in the midst of this pandemic, which has created a host of new challenges, but hopefully also opportunities for our state and for our voters.
It definitely is easier now than it used to be, isn't it?
Well, we can always do better, and that's my focus moving forward, really building relationships with folks in the community. I've learned over the past 19 months since I took office how many ways in which our state has fallen short in the past of meeting the needs and expectations of the community. It's become clear that there is a history of inaction by my office, which has led to a lot of frustration and mistrust. And so, we're really working on addressing that moving forward. And Pat, I know you've done this work for so long and have been a leader. We became friends nearly a decade ago during my first run for this office, and you've been a great friend and advisor throughout. So I appreciate, all the work that you've done as well throughout your career to increase access to voting and all services for the blind and others with disabilities.
Thank you very much, Secretary Benson. The next question has a sad ending. He said, at the last election, I asked for an absentee ballot and never got one. Will I still get it? And if I never get it, what should I do?
Well, there's two accessible absent voter ballot applications in our state. One online and one that's a downloadable PDF for blind voters and others with severe disabilities that would otherwise prevent them from voting absent voter ballots privately and independently. Both of those are available at michigan.gov/vote, and voters who request accessible electronic absent voter ballots for the August 4th election or primary will be emailed an electronic ballot that they can mark on an electronic device using their own assistive technology, and print and mail or otherwise return to their local clerk by 8 p.m. on election day. We're continuing to make even more improvements, and we'll have a significant improvement also in place for the November election.
Okay. The next question says, how are absentee ballots counted, and how can I be sure that my absentee ballot was counted?
That's a great question and an important one, because we have more people voting absentee or through the mail than ever before in our state's history. In fact, for next week's primary, there will be close to 2 million people who've requested to vote by mail and requested to have their ballot sent to them. That's twice as many, or almost twice as many than ever before in our state's history. And that's just the primary. So knowing that, it's more important now than ever to ensure that counting all those ballots that are going to be voted absentee or sent through the mail is done safely and securely. Now, the state recently enacted a new law to allow for the consolidation of absentee counting boards at the county level to increase efficiencies even more. But notably, every jurisdiction has what's essentially now called an absentee counting board, or some way in which those ballots that are sent centrally to the clerks through the mail for counting are processed and counted and tabulated on election day. But rest assured, every ballot will be counted, and in many jurisdictions, you can, for the August primary, track your ballot to when it's been received and returned and counted. And we'll be implementing statewide ballot tracking software in time for the November election, so that people everywhere will be able to track their ballots and ensure that they've been received and counted.
Is it true, Secretary Benson, that local clerks can't start counting the ballots until the polls close?
They can begin processing. They actually cannot begin even opening envelopes and preparing ballots to be counted until 7 a.m. on election day. Now, that's different than most other states. In fact, in 18 other states, clerks are allowed to begin preparing ballots to be tabulated prior to election day, in some cases weeks prior to election day. And that's really important when you're talking about tens of thousands of ballots. To begin even opening the envelopes themselves on election day morning is really troublesome, problematic, and an inefficient way of running the election. That's why clerks throughout our state have called on our state legislature to enact legislation to give our clerks more time to process these ballots and prepare them to be counted on election day, so that we can get results that are accurate and efficiently tabulated and able to be announced as soon as possible after the polls close.
Pat, if you got another question?
Did we lose you?
Yeah, my lips were moving, but I think nothing was coming out. Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was asking Secretary Benson if that is a change that you would like to see in Michigan law to give clerks a little bit of a head start on that counting.
Yes, we would. I think it's something I've asked for since my March 2019 appearance before the State House the State House of Representatives Elections Committee, and I'm optimistic that we'll get something by November. But it's been a long, slow haul. Even though we've had now 5 elections throughout the state, 3 in 2019 and 2 in 2020, including 1 statewide presidential primary, where voters have had this right to vote by mail, and where applications to vote by mail have steadily increased. And now there's more than 2 million, more than ever before. My hope is that the legislature will act, and it's something that I've consistently called on them before, and I know clerks are demanding this change as well. So we'll see. I'm again optimistic, but the one thing that has been certain about 2020 is that there's a lot of uncertainty, and so I think the hope springs eternal, but what we need to do until there is actual change is to continue to call on the legislature to make the needed changes.
Secretary Benson, the next question is similar but different, has to do with provisional ballots. What causes a provisional ballot to be issued to a would-be voter, and how are they counted?
Well, there are many reasons a provisional ballot might be issued. And it's typically if someone shows up in person and for some reason they are not found to be an eligible voter, we don't want anyone to leave without voting. So provisional ballots help us capture their vote and then give them an opportunity to confirm their eligibility or their identity and then have that vote counted. So it's a way of capturing a vote. It does get complicated and it hasn't always been implemented as smoothly and as effectively as it could be. But it is an important aspect of our election law to ensure that voters' voices are continued to be heard, even if there's a snafu or challenge in the elections process on election day.
Can voters who receive a provisional ballot be assured that ultimately the vote will be counted, or not necessarily?
I just wanted to check in. So my team is registered for tomorrow.
Okay.
Or is that's a separate, sorry, I heard a separate conversation. I thought that was a question. Yes, on the provisional ballot piece, if a voter is given a provisional ballot, they have time to give, it differs with every situation, but they do have time to confirm their identity and give the updated information to their clerk. It's oftentimes takes some additional information, but they do have a few days after election day to provide that.
The other question that I have next is, I've heard that we can vote electronically. That's how I would like to vote. How and when will I be able to do that?
Well, it's important to use technology in a way that increases access to the vote, but that also prevents prevents against any particular security glitches. And so, with that in mind, we have we don't have a scenario where everyone can vote electronically, but we have various different ways in which we can use technology to, for example, deliver ballots as our absent voter ballot application and ballot delivery and the accessible ballot delivery service we're developing will illustrate. And in addition to that, there's ways in which ballots for voters overseas can receive and return ballots, and we're continuing to work with the legislature to ease that process. So there's various ways in which technology can be used to increase the access to the vote, and but we're not yet to the point where everyone can vote on the internet, for example, because the security provisions are just not there. So utilizing technology to make improvements and modernize how we vote for everyone, and particularly for voters with disabilities, is really critical. And we also have to do so carefully with a mind towards protecting the security and integrity of our elections. And that's a delicate balance that we continue to have to make moving forward.
Secretary Benson, we hear a lot about voter fraud from people who are concerned that voting by mail will just escalate that notion to the nth degree and it'll produce chaos. Do you agree with that?
Well, there's really no evidence that voter fraud exists. In fact, recent studies of voting by mail found it to be an infinitesimal, 1 in every 6 states has one incident. And it's something that, we have to take seriously and catch it when it occurs, but also ensure that we're not doing anything to to overly react in a way that would neither protect the security of the process or enable the accessibility of elections. So we work every day to ensure our elections are secure, that we're making it easier to vote and harder to cheat. That is a continual mantra within my administration, and that means continuing to adapt to implement additional security guidelines, but also with an eye towards making sure we are doing everything we can to anticipate, and if anyone does try to defraud the system, that we're there to investigate and prosecute and hold them accountable if it happens.
Secretary Benson, the next questioner says that he would like to promote that people with disabilities interact with their local clerk in advance of the elections and speak with them about things that they might do to make voting more accessible for individuals with disabilities. Do you think that's a fine idea?
Yeah, I think, you know, we have, so first I'll talk about what our office has done, but I really want to underscore the impact that it has when members of the community, the disability community, speak out. Of course, the ADA, which we're celebrating today, and I know, Pat, I think you were there when it was enacted, but which is an amazing story I'd love to hear, but in addition to that, you know, the ADA and so much other civil rights legislation really came about at the demand of voters who are most affected by it. So we can't, you know, underscore enough the importance of community members speaking out, leading, and continuing to ensure that elected officials are responsive to their needs and requests, clerks included. That said, our office has also, in response to calls from the community leaders, recently updated and provided all election clerks with guidance on providing voter assist terminals for voters with disabilities. And we're soon going to be releasing a video with instructions for voters and our local election workers on how to use those terminals to make them a little bit easier to use. And in addition to that, we've provided a checklist to election clerks to review polling place accessibility, and we'll soon provide a slideshow presentation that provides further guidance on that same subject. That type of work, that type of guidance that we've been able to provide has been directly informed by members of the disability community that we've worked with and have been able to lean on for information, to share their perspectives, to share their experiences, and to help us solve problems together. That has been invaluable in our work. I know for our clerks as well. There are so many of us who simply, you know, want to do everything we can to ensure that every voice is heard and every vote is counted. But it often does take partnerships with communities that have been historically disenfranchised to ensure that we're being responsive and really developing solutions that are in line with and targeted to the needs of that particular community. And we can only really do that through partnerships, through collaboration, through conversations. And so I'm grateful for all of the members of the disability community who have continued to advise us, and I know will continue to do, and really want to encourage everyone to share their stories, to share their perspectives, because that's how we can make really educated and informed improvements to the system.
Thank you. The next questioner is obviously an eager voter. She or he says that she's going to turn 18 on October 31st. And besides being a Halloween birthday, she's anxious to vote. Can she, since she will be 18 by the time it's election day in November, can she still register for this upcoming election?
Yes, if you are going to be, you can only vote in elections that you're eligible to vote in. So you have to be 18 to vote. But you can register beforehand if you are going to turn 18 by election day. And so certainly, yes, I say that as an October baby. My birthday is October 22nd. So I'm familiar with, you know, that was long ago. I know how it is if you, especially in states where the registration window is sometimes 30 days prior, you want to make sure that you're registered and able to vote in all the elections you're eligible to vote in. So so you certainly can register, and even if you forget, the great thing is that in Michigan now we have election day registration. So in the 2 weeks prior to and on election day itself, people can still register, eligible citizens can still register to vote by going to their clerk's office and registering to vote in person with appropriate residency verification and vote in that election. So so even if on November 3rd itself, you decide you want to register to vote and you've just turned 18, you can go to your clerk's office that day, register, get your ballot and return it, and have voted in the November election.
Okay. Next question comes from someone who says, I am a person with low literacy. Do I have to be able to read the election ballot before I go to the polls? And when I do go, can I have the assistance of a friend or family member to vote?
You do. There is no literacy test for voting. You do not have to pass a literacy test for voting, and you can get a federal law enables you to have the assistance in voting if you so choose, and utilize that when voting in person. That's also another reason why it's so helpful to vote from home where you can get that assistance from home as well in the privacy of your own home. But certainly, and certainly voting from home enables people to do research in a way that is convenient and accessible to them on the various different candidates and positions so that they can be an informed voter and make an informed selection as a citizen.
Okay. The next question has to do with upcoming elections in Michigan, both next week and in November. You've sort of answered this, at least partially. How will accessible voting work for people with disabilities for these elections?
Well, we're working every day to make continual improvements, and a lot of them I just mentioned in terms of our recently updated guidance to all election clerks. Now, for in-person voting, every precinct is required to have a accessible voting machine. In the past, the AutoMark machines were very effective. They were replaced by my predecessor, and in some cases there are now inferior machines that we're looking into because I'm concerned about that. And it's again been because members of the community have shared with us their experiences that we were even alerted to these the need to improve these machines. But that said, those machines will be in place, those accessible machines will be in place in clerks' offices as well as in precincts on election day. And as I mentioned, we provided a checklist to election clerks to review polling place accessibility, as well as a slideshow presentation that provides further guidance on how to ensure the physical locations of polling places are accessible. And then on top of that, we've recently updated and provided all election clerks with guidance on providing voter assist terminals for voters with disabilities, and we'll have a video with instructions for voters and election workers on how to use those terminals. So we're working to make improvements to that in-person voting experience for those citizens who wish to vote as an absent voter or through the mail. As I mentioned, there's 2 accessible absent voter ballot applications online and also a downloadable PDF for blind voters and others with severe disabilities that would otherwise prevent them from voting absent voter ballots privately and independently. And you can find both at michigan.gov/vote.
Well, if I might add to that, my wife Janelle and I have already voted for next week's election, and it was quite a rush for us to request an accessible ballot from the East Lansing City Clerk's office. And by the time we came home from the city clerk's office, the accessible ballot was in our respective computers, and we voted on our own computers at our own time level, and of course confidentially and independently. And that was quite a rush. So thank you for putting that in place for us.
I'm so glad to hear the system worked well and appreciate that feedback. And it was great to hear that, because I know how fun it is to vote, and how we want to make sure everyone has that joy of and the power of having their vote counted and their voices heard. So so thank you for that feedback and letting us know that our new systems work for you, and for those who may have or may experience any challenges or snafus, we're consistently working with all that we have at our disposal to ensure that our systems are meeting the goals and expectations of our voters, as well as meeting state security requirements. So, but it's good. It's great to know that we're getting better, and we'll continue to improve.
I'm sure we can look for more improvements in the future. The next question is one that I temporarily forgot. Oh, this has to do with your work before you became Secretary of State. And you did an exhaustive research of how elections are run in other states. I think you may have contacted every Secretary of State in the nation, and that led to the publishing of a book. What prompted you to do that?
Well, I started my career at the Southern Poverty Law Center in Montgomery, Alabama, investigating hate groups and hate crimes throughout the country, and was really moved by the work that occurred in 1965 and really throughout the Civil Rights Movement to ensure that everyone had access to the vote and had access to the power to hold decision makers accountable, which is what really the vote ultimately is. And noting, the brutality that so many, and in many cases, so many faced in Selma, like John Lewis, who recently passed, like Viola Liuzzo, who was killed during some of the Montgomery marches, a Detroiter. felt a deep commitment to continue their work. And it's the reason I became an attorney, is to ensure the voting rights of every citizen were protected and that we were living up to the goals of those who fought to pass and enact a Voting Rights Act in 1965 and those who've worked for voting access throughout the history of our democracy. And what I came to see over several elections were that how secretaries of state make decisions every day that impact access to the vote and the security of our elections. And oftentimes election lawyers are suing secretaries of state to compel them to do the right thing. And I, in recognition of that, wanted to be a Secretary of State so that I could proactively be a leader to do the right thing as well, and in partnership with so many voting rights advocates throughout the state and throughout the country. And so but I was also moved by the fact that secretaries of state are in most states are chief election officers, and they're elected, and yet oftentimes we don't know enough about who they are or what they do. And so I wrote a book to tell the story of the positive things secretaries of state are doing and can do on both sides of the aisle to make voting more accessible and secure for all of our citizens. And was so inspired by the work many secretaries were doing all around the country that I aspired to hold the position myself. And after running a law school and a number of other things, here I am, and I'm really proud to be now applying a lot of those best practices that I learned throughout my career here in Michigan to particularly in this moment where there's so many new changes and we're in the midst of this historic pandemic, to do everything we can from an informed standpoint to improve access to the vote and make voting work for everyone.
So to achieve voting access for everyone who chooses to vote is a big deal for you. Obviously.
It's the cornerstone of my career because my parents were special education teachers. And I don't know if you knew that, but I grew up in an environment with two parents who fought every day for people with learning disabilities and physical disabilities, and wanting to ensure that everyone had access to equal education was the cornerstone of their careers. And for me, recognizing ultimately that there's no right to education in our country, unfortunately, there's no right to a well-paying job or healthcare or other things that we feel everyone should have a right to have. But there is a right to vote. And through that right to vote, if it's truly accessible for everyone, we can realize every other right that perhaps we should have, whether it's a right to access to quality education or right to access to quality healthcare or a right to access to quality housing. So with all of that said, I dedicated my career both as an attorney and as an advocate to ensuring everyone has the right to vote, and I'm proud to be now actualizing a lot of that work this year as the Secretary of State of Michigan.
Clearly, the disability community of Michigan is grateful to you for the work that you've done and the work you will be doing to make voting even better for us. We thank you for that. Our time is about to run short, but we still have time for a couple of questions. And what I'd like to ask relates to your research with all of the other secretaries of state. What was the biggest surprise for you that you hadn't uncovered before, that you said, aha?
I think there were many. I think that two was how critical it was that secretaries of state play the role of the chief educator of voters throughout the state, meaning that it's our job in an official state capacity every day to do everything we can to make sure voters are informed and engaged citizens. That's the essence of my work. And the secretaries who embrace that creatively, like Trey Grayson, the then Secretary of Kentucky, who revamped civics education in his state, or the Secretary of State of Arizona and the state of Washington, who collectively implemented online voter registration and educated citizens about it. They were the ones who really moved the needle in increasing access to the vote and creating an informed and engaged electorate in their state. So just the direct role that they played as the chief educators of voters and advocates for voters in their states was very clear. And then the second thing I saw that was really particularly inspiring was that in states that had the best policies in place for ensuring access to the vote and security of the process, they were there ultimately because the Secretary of State championed them in partnership with voters and in partnerships with others. But the bully pulpit of the office, to be a voice for voters, to be the chief advocate for voters and voters' rights in your state. As the Secretary of State was clear and underscored by secretaries, again, across the aisle in nearly every state. And I think, so that really inspired me in a positive way. And then you also saw the other side where, well, that it was just particularly important for secretaries of state to serve as the referees in our democracy, to not take sides, to be impartial, and to work to just simply ensure every voice is heard. And with that in mind, recognizing the importance of this not being really a partisan office, but an office that is a voter-driven, voter-focused, voter-centric office, became a focus of mine. And that's really the mentality and the approach I've taken and brought to this office.
Secretary Benson, considering the passion you have for people being able to vote, it must pain you when you hear people say, no, I don't vote. It doesn't make a difference anyway.
You know, it's so interesting you say that, because one of the first things I did upon taking office was begin developing the Voting Matters initiative, which we recently launched. And what that is an initiative where I go with many others to every community in the state that has low turnout, where people aren't voting. We actually looked at the 100 precincts in our state that had the lowest turnout. To say, like, let's go there. Let's not just increase turnout statewide, let's actually increase it in these historically marginalized communities that haven't been voting. And to do that, the first step is to go to those communities and listen and just say, how have we failed you? How could we do better? What do you feel would need to change in order for you to vote and feel that your voice matters? And in these conversations so far, what we've found is incredibly inspiring, which is that people aren't saying, by and large, I don't vote because my voice doesn't matter. People are saying, I want to vote, but I don't know how. I don't know where to go. I don't know how to request my ballot. I don't know how to get to my precinct. I don't know how to register to vote. I can't read, and so I'm not sure even how to get information about candidates. Or I'm worried that I can't vote because of my past criminal history, which of course is false. You can vote in Michigan regardless of your criminal history. So that's actually been very inspiring, because it showed me, much in my conversations sort of similarly with the disability community on how we can make voting more accessible, is how much we can do to actually encourage more people to vote and get more people voting, simply by making the rules of the game easier. And making the structure more accessible. And so that actually makes me feel like all the work we're doing every day to make voting more accessible and secure actually will move the needle in these lower turnout communities, these historically disenfranchised communities, to increase their engagement and turnout as well. Of course, it takes a lot of different pieces and a lot of different work, and it also requires candidates to go to these communities and talk and engage voters. But the bottom line is, to me, the more partnerships we have at every level, the more we listen to each other and are responsive and act on what we learn from communities that aren't voting or having difficulty voting, the more we can improve the system for everyone. And that is what I certainly plan and hope to do moving forward, just as I've done in so many ways throughout my career to this point.
Secretary Benson, we have a little less than 5 minutes to go, but I'd like to ask you two things. One is, tell us a little bit about what you hope to accomplish in the remainder of this term as Secretary of State. What's your vision for the future of those activities that come under your purview? And secondly, tell us something about Jocelyn Benson that we may not know. And are you still a Tiger fan?
Well, as you may know, or I don't know, behind me right now is not just the Detroit D, but a picture of Pudge Rodriguez at home plate in 2006 during the playoffs, and a picture of the Spirit of Detroit wearing a Detroit Tigers jersey. So, yep, still a Tigers fan. But in addition to that, I think, there's so much I want to do moving forward in my term. So much we've already accomplished in terms of implementing the mandate of voters, but the proposals enacted in 2018 to create an independent citizens redistricting commission and enact automatic voter registration and voting by mail, and so many other things that were part of the constitutional amendments passed by voters in 2018. But moving forward, one, I think like everyone, I want us to move healthily out of this pandemic and get back to where things were before. And we know there's a lot of uncertainty between now and then as to what needs to happen. I also really just want to move forward in August and November and make sure that despite all the challenges that we're facing, that as much as possible, every vote is counted, every voice is heard, and that we're giving voters the best democracy that they can have at this historic moment in our country's history. So getting through August and November successfully, which to me means high turnout, that people are voting, and that people are trusting the results of the election. And then, taking what we learned from this year, I want to sit down in December and look at the data from this year and make informed decisions about what we need to do moving forward to continue increasing turnout and increasing the security of our elections in the state. We'll also be implementing over the next year the Citizens Redistricting Commission, which is about to be selected next month. And so I'm looking forward to seeing that further develop as well. And it's amazing to me that this December I'll be halfway through my term, and yet still so much has happened and so much more will happen in the months ahead. And I'm excited and look forward to working with you, Pat, as well in the months ahead, so that we can continue to strengthen partnerships with the disability community and make even more improvements on the accessibility of the vote for our disability community as well.
Thank you for that. I look forward to doing whatever we can to help you achieve the goals you want for voters in our state. Secretary Benson, that is a fact that we are now out of time, and I thank you so much for the time you spent with us and revealing the depth of your heart and passion for the work. We appreciate it. Thank you.
This is your chat moderator, Michael Patton, and I we do have just actually one or two thank yous that came through on the chat that I'd like to forward. I know that Laura Frankel says we're proud and grateful for having Joycelyn Benson in Lansing looking after our needs. We also want to thank our interpreters for the deaf for their assistance, and we want to thank you, Pat Cannon, and also Secretary of State Benson. That's it from the moderating the chat.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you so much.
And I'd like to add something too. And that's that I would like to quote to you the words of Justin Dart. Vote like your life depends upon it, because it does. Thank you.
Very much so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
So people don't have to leave right away if you don't want to. If you want to chat, have some comments you want to make to each other, that's perfectly okay. Or perhaps you have some questions to ask of Pat. He is a former ADA coordinator.
Is that Susan speaking?
And speaking for the blind. And I know we have some blind folks on this call, so maybe you've got some particular questions.
Susan, I heard you talking at the end, but then it went silent over there. And I just heard in my headset that Kim has left the meeting.
Well,
Susan, are you still there?
we're still talking. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
So has anybody got anything they would like to ask any of us? Fellow participants? Pat?
I have a question for Pat.
Yes.
Hi, so this is Nick Swallow. I'm the independent living specialist at Disability Connections in Jackson. And I heard Secretary Benson refer to, when you were there for the signing of the ADA. And I just wondered if you maybe on this historic time wanted to just touch on how that was, what that experience was like.
Well, I'd be happy to. It was probably one of the more satisfying experiences of my life. It was quite a privilege to be asked to attend the bill signing ceremony in July 26, 30 years ago. And this gives you an example of how eager I was to be part of it. The ceremonies didn't start until 10 o'clock, and I woke up early in my hotel room and getting dressed to realize it was close to 8, and I could have gone to breakfast, but instead I went to the White House and got in line early And there was one person ahead of me, and that was the wife of Justin Dart, Yoshiko Dart. So Yoshiko and I were the first ones in line, and because of that, we got excellent seats for the bill signing. I was in the second row behind people like the Secretary of Education, and Elizabeth Dole was right in front of me as well. And when the ceremony started and the White House lawn was full of people with disabilities and their advocates, it was exhilarating when President Bush came out and made a few comments and signed the bill. And I still remember what he said as he put his pen to the page. He said, "May the shameful walls of exclusion come tumbling down." A very powerful statement. And he went on to explain that at the heart of the ADA is the full integration of people with disabilities into all aspects of our society. And that's, I think, for me, has been one of the bigger rushes of the ADA over the last 30 years. I know people think of that as being related to employment first, but it does so much to assist people with disabilities being integrated to all aspects of our society, whether it's going on a hiking trail in the Rocky Mountains or approaching a fishing pier where that has been made accessible so everyone can get there. That's really what the full integration of people with disabilities is all about. So it was a big rush, and thank you for asking me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Pat.
Susan, are you still there?
Susan, you're muted.
Okay, this is Elaine Kolb.
Hi, Elaine.
Hi there. Well, first of all, my goodness, y'all are lucky to have her as the Secretary of State.
Aren't we?
Wow. I mean, does she really get it, or does she really get it? You know what I mean?
She does indeed.
Anyway, but I guess I was listening to you, Pat, talking about Yoshika.
Yes.
And she, oh my goodness, and she's still with us. She is such an amazing human being.
She is.
And my favorite personal memory of Justin and Yoshika was when I was with ADAPT, and some of us managed to get inside of some of the Department of Transportation buildings, and we were blocking doors and whatever, and it was
for you.
It was cold. This was like in the process of getting the ADA passed, and it was brutal. And I was able to walk back in those days certainly more than I can now. And but I was still using a manual wheelchair as part of the demonstration. Anyway, so it looked like we were going to be there overnight, and it was cold, and it was like, anyway, I managed to sneak in a side way because they were doing garbage, and so it was open. So I just like meandered in, like just wandered in, and was inside before any of the security knew that I was in there. But what Yoshika and Justin did was they brought food and blankets.
That doesn't surprise me, but it's nice to hear it affirmed.
You know, it was like they were the ones that showed up with basic survival stuff so that the ones who were outside, where it was quite cold, that they had extra things to stay warm and to have something to eat. And they passed some of the food inside to those of us who were on the inside too, through the doors. We had the revolving doors blocked, but we had it so that there was a way to pass things back and forth a little bit. Anyway, so, but it was just so amazing.
Well, I'm glad you had that. I'm glad you had that experience with Yoshiko and Justin.
Story with Yoshiko. I had lunch with her one day, and she was telling me about her youth and the fact that Justin used to be, his family was Dart Industries, which
Yes.
is Tupperware. And Yoshiko was a Tupperware lady.
Yep,
That's
I know.
how he met her. And so we were sitting around and somebody said, Yoshiko, sing the Tupperware song. And I'm like, really? And she went right into song and started singing all these little ditties from her Tupperware days. And it was so it was so cute and so expressive to think that you know, Justin's wife would be singing Tupperware songs, but that's what entertained us at lunch that day.
Well, the business was good to both of them.
Yes.
And allowed them to do things on behalf of the disability community that I think we still benefit from today. Is Susan returned, or is she
I'm here.
gone? Susan, I just wanted to ask, is this going to be made available for viewing later by anyone who wants to see it?
Yes, it will be in the YouTube channel is not public yet. It will be in a day or two, and then I will send out announcements so that everybody can view it.
Okay, thank you. Please make sure you send one to me. I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And Susan, thank you so much for your help in helping us all get prepared for this, and especially dealing with the technical difficulties I was having prior to today. It's exasperating. You may not know, I used to be in radio broadcasting, and I used to just go nuts with technical difficulties. I hated them then, and I don't like them anymore now.
No, they're not fun at all. And since Zoom is still, I mean, Zoom has been around for a long time, but being used so publicly it's in its infancy. And so it's used to sort of been created for people who were techies and knew all this stuff. Now, those of us who aren't really tech savvy are using technology every day, and it's not really been adapted to us very well yet.
Yeah, that's a fact. Well, thank you for thinking of me and letting me be a part of this. It was
thank you very much for being a part of it.
Well, it was a pleasure for me. And anyone else have any questions other than waving goodbye?
Well, I'm waving goodbye, Pat. Thanks so much. Laura Frankel here.
Thank you, Laura. Good to see you again.
Good to
Bye,
see
everyone.
you.
Bye.
Thank you so much to our interpreters.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And even our card person, even though you didn't get the card.
What's your date of birth?
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Happy day.
So long, everybody. Thanks much.
Take care.
Bye.
Date is
Ooh, our chat transcript. Since you're still on, Pat, have you had a chance to look at the whole schedule of events we're doing?
No, I think I have not.
Well, you're going to have to check it out. mi-ada.org. We're having,
mi-ada.org.
Yep.
I will.
We're having
Thank you.
over 80 events for the next now 64 days. There's going to be something happening every day.
That's a lot of work, but it must be satisfying.
It is satisfying.
Oh, good.
I think the disability community is clamoring for it. That's the impression I get.
You know, in the late 80s, when we were all clamoring for the ADA, that I think brought people with disabilities together in a way that no other legislation has since then.
Yeah.
But I think that the true advocates for disability rights haven't gone away, and we still need to be diligent in watching how the ADA unfolds, and to be ready to jump in and take some action if we start to feel threatened with its loss. So,
well, the goal of having these events is to actually get the disability community, not just in Michigan but nationwide, more focused on working together, not working for our individual needs as disabilities, but that we are a voting bloc. We are powerful if we work together. But when we work for just our own piece of the pie, we don't accomplish very much. But
yeah, Has Michael Patton left the?
So yes.
Yes, yes.
Do you want to get a message to him?
Well, is he the same Michael Patton that used to work for the Greater Detroit Center for Independent Living?
Yes.
He sounds older.
He is older.
Well,
You're older.
We're all older day by day. This is Elaine Cole. Pat, I just wanted to say that it's a pleasure meeting you because we seem to be kind of cohorts in the level of experience that we have in all of this. Next month I will be 71.
it's a nice age. I used to be 71. About 7 years ago. I'll be 78 soon.
Ah, good for you. Well, also, I don't know, there's different organizations and all over the place and whatever, but in terms of folks that are blind, my strongest connections have been with people that were members of the National Federation of the Blind.
That doesn't surprise me. They are very active.
And I went to a friend of mine who is blind, still living, but originally from India. So I went with Raj and his wife to the National Federation of the Blind convention in Louisville, Kentucky. That was a number of years ago. And that was before I really got that involved with ADAPT and everything.
I went to that same convention, but it was in 1985.
Ah.
It might have been before your time.
No, that was the one.
Was it really?
That would have to be the one because, yeah.
And here we are again.
And here we are again.
Okay.
But I just want to tell you, at that stage, see, I have a spinal cord injury. And I've been through various stages. So I initially, because my injury was in 77. So I recovered enough to walk with difficulty, but enough so I could climb up and down on the inaccessible buses.
Yes.
And then after a while, my left knee gave out. So since then, I've really had to use a power chair, which is fine. But I was walking with difficulty, but not very agile, I guess,
Yes.
when I went to that convention in Louisville. And assertive blind people sometimes don't realize that not all sighted people can get the hell out of your way.
Yes, I've known some of those assertive blind people.
I got knocked down 3 times.
Man, that's not fair. Well, maybe Elaine, the next time I cross paths with you, we can get together and knock down a blind person.
Okay, all right.
Just kidding, but it was nice to see you again. And if our paths cross again, make sure you reach out and say howdy.
Well, I don't know. I felt that you and I have to have a connection somewhere because I just feel these things. And so there you go. Well, that's amazing. I just think that's so funny.
Yep. Well, I'm going to sign off now.
Okay.
Nice to see you again, Elaine. And Susan, thank you for all of your help. I appreciate it so much.
Oh, I'm glad to have had you, Mark.
Okay, keep in touch.
Come back anytime.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Wow.
Christian, you're on mute. You want to contribute anything since you've been hanging out? Probably walked away, muted it.
Oh, well, these things happen. I'm
going to stop the recording.